So up now, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our next presenter. I have Phillip Jackson from Something Digital coming up on the stage for us. Woo! We were talking about strategy. We were talking about insights. This gentleman is a thought leader in the industry for transformative technologies and commerce. Turns out a bit of a good gentleman on the podcast scene as well, as it turns out. So I would like to welcome officially Phillip Jackson to the stage.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love you too. You know, there's a joke or sort of a contest that's brewing. Does anyone know Craig Reagan? Anybody? He's actually copied my hair recently, and it's kind of uncomfortable for me. And I'd really appreciate that if he did not do that. So if you see us together, make sure that you remind him that he's a filthy, dirty copycat. I'm Phillip Jackson, and I'm from a company called Something Digital, and we're proud to be partners with Logicbroker now for years in helping them deliver solutions for our merchants. We are a systems integrator based in Midtown Manhattan, been in business for 18 years, delivering beautiful e-commerce experiences. And so we've been on the front lines of doing digital commerce for a very long time, and we work with brands, small and large, all over the United States and abroad. And so it's awesome to be able to speak to you today. And I have a unique perspective because we talk to merchants a lot. And we like to take these conversations that we have and put them out for the benefit of other people in our industry to be able to listen to what merchants talk about when they get together. Today, I have the feeling that there's not a ton of retailers here that are looking for what they're supposed to be doing next. But when you get 30, 40, 50, 100 retailers in a room together, you should hear the conversations that they have. Every single one of them are looking for that silver bullet. They're all looking for what it is that they're doing next. They're trying to stay competitive. And we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that they're talking about and how they can move ahead. So we decided we were going to put some of these conversations to good use so that we all had some insight into them. So we created a couple podcasts. One is called Merchant to Merchant, where we actually get panels of merchants together to talk about these sorts of things, ask them what's working and what's not working in their industry, and we set them off in a direction. You should hear some of the amazing stories that they have, and that's available on iTunes. Brian Lang, who's speaking a little bit later today, is on our business development team. He and I started a podcast just about a year ago called Future Commerce, and we started and we charted the podcast to say, what is next in e-commerce? And what happened was, in about a year's time, everything that we were talking about in those first few episodes is already here and it's being done. And so it's kind of an amazing thing to see the technology uptake. We're speaking with amazing retailers like Adidas. We're speaking with and Neiman Marcus and the Lowe's Innovation Lab. And we're talking to the top retailers in our industry and asking them, what are you doing to stay ahead and what are you doing to stay competitive? And do you know what every single one of us you know what they tell us every single time that we have them on the show? That it's not technology they're trying to keep up with, it's the consumer that they're trying to keep up with. So I encourage you to listen to this too as well, because this is top of mind for us. And I appreciate being called a thought leader. I've been telling people I'm a thought leader for years. It's finally catching on. So you're going to see every single conference that you go to this year, and everyone that I went to last year has a talk somewhere titled The Future of Commerce, okay? And I would venture to say that everybody senses that there's something new that's on the horizon. There's something that's coming. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the concepts or the abstract ideas that are going to power the digital commerce experiences in the future. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But to get there first, we sort of have to do a little bit of a retrospective, because I'm going to prove to you why I think this is true, why this is a truism. So let's talk a little bit about the brief history of computing. And this is computing in a nutshell, is when the fonts just run right off the end of the slide. We spent 35 years in desktop computing, 35 years, almost as long as I've been alive, if you can believe that. We've spent 35 years mimicking the paradigms of the real world in a digital space, okay? We have real-world metaphors that explain and parallel everything that we do and interact with on a daily basis. And this helps us, right? This helps us bridge the gap from a world that was tactile, that we could touch, that we could interact with, to a world that was purely conceptual. to interacting with ones and zeros in a way that we could conceptualize as human beings, right? What's amazing is that the desktop stuck around for so long, because when mobile computing came around and we continued that metaphor of the desktop, that desktop metaphor begins to break down when we no longer are only doing work, right? The desktop was a monotasking device that was specifically meant to organize the way that we worked and the way that we applied computing to business needs. So instead of files and folders and recycling bins and trash cans, now we have to have new metaphors that make sense for our home lives and for taking the kids to school and picking up the groceries and having our Amazon Prime delivered to us in an hour, God forbid it's 2. So everything changes now, because we don't have metaphors that are concrete or solid that help bridge the gap to the other parts of our lives that the digital revolution is now infiltrating. So the desktop doesn't look like a desktop anymore. This is what a desktop looks like now. This is what a desktop looked like 18 months ago. They've changed this since. So we no longer have a clear paradigm anymore. You can't say that any one of these things is even really, I'm not even sure what half of these things are. There's applications have become a blurred line between files. All of our files are no longer necessarily on our devices. They're not stored in folders anymore. Things have become and adopted their own metaphor. They've become part of their own reality that can't be described in any other way. And so it's enabled us as human beings to be able to focus and deal with our lives in a way that gets us away from having to complete one task at a time, what I would call a monotasking device. So we're moving and we're evolving as a species to being able to deal with and multitask and do all of these things all at one time and allow who we are and how we are made and how we are wired to actually be expressed through digital devices. When you look at, there's this book by Mary Krasowski who says there's a study after study after study has shown that the desktop design in and of itself, while it was really good for helping bridge that gap and bridge that digital divide from people who were not digital natives to interact with computing, it did not give you the kind of support that you would have in the real world for things like collaboration, multitasking, and for the roles that we fulfill in business and life every single day. And so without that desktop, when we move away from the desktop, all those old metaphors begin to break down. And that's why I believe we're on a cusp of a revolution even in digital commerce. In fact, it's interesting. You don't have to go too far back in time. You can find people as young as 18, 20 years old who think of this here as a save icon and not as a floppy disk. In fact, there's an interesting meme that's going around right now that cropped up in the past week or two where the novel idea of that little metal clip on the top of the floppy disk was in its protected state where it couldn't be written over, the clip was closed. And in its open state, it could be written to. It was like a read and write only operation. But it's amazing that it didn't even take a whole generation. It just took about 10 years before people forgot how floppy disks worked. It doesn't take long for our old metaphors to die, even when we had real-world analogs for them. So this is now a save icon. In fact, the best-selling trash can on Amazon.com in 2016 doesn't look like the icon that we all familiarize ourselves with what a trash can looks like. Our real world is changing around us, and our digital space can't even keep up with that. In fact, everything that we do in computing today looks different. You don't see these kinds of icons in computing anymore. These are metaphors that were good for a time, but are long behind us now. And you've probably seen this video or this GIF that's floated around of the way that our desks or the way that our lives used to work and how we used to operate and organize, and all the things that we used to do in our lives and how they all had single-purpose devices. Anybody ever watch Alton Brown? He hates those. Any device that's purpose-built for a single use. It's a monotasker, right? He hates those monotasker devices because they're only good for one thing. We have and I have an affinity for this idea that we all carry these amazing supercomputers in our pockets. Anybody carry a supercomputer in your pocket today? Everybody carries a supercomputer in your pocket. There's a lot of this conversation around the $1,000 iPhone and this hurdle that we're up against now. Who's going to spend $1,000 on an iPhone? It's crazy. Yeah, who is going to spend $1,000 for a device you use every 3 minutes of your life for the next 3 years that is effectively a supercomputer that connects you to every other human being in the world? Who would ever spend that much money on something like that? That sounds awful. But everything is condensed right now into this one device. And it no longer just sits on our desktop, it's right on our hip. So I'm getting to the commerce component here. Here's Radio Shack. Anyone shop at Radio Shack? This is an ad in Radio Shack, and I'm not really sure of exactly the date, somewhere around February 19th. I forget the year here. Let's see if it says it down here. I believe it's like 1987. So sometime in around the 1980s timeframe, this ad, this circular from Radio Shack, every single item for sale here, your phone now does. That's everything from a stereo to a calculator, which my teachers always told me I'd never have one on me wherever I go, which I do, so take that, Mr. Pink. To the way that we carry our music. In fact, we don't even carry digital media anymore for our music. It's all in the cloud. Everything that we interact with, and from a telephone, yes, your phone is still a phone. You can call people with it. It's amazing the way technology is. To these massive 15-inch woofers. Anyone on a subway listening to other people's music out loud? That's a thing now. We're all listening to other people's music live. And what's incredible about that is that it shows you how far we've come in such a short period of time. And I'm using that example to set you up to say, if you think that connected commerce and digital commerce and e-commerce is the future and that's where we are, then I've got a little bit of a surprise for you, because life is moving even faster now. The way that the shopping cart metaphor applies in digital commerce has very strong parallels to the way that we just moved out of the desktop computing metaphor. And so I have titled this talk, "The Shopping Cart is Dead," and my friends at Magento love when I say that. The shopping cart is dead. Let's talk a little bit about how the shopping cart came to life. There was an amazing time in the early 90s that actually allowed the perfect environment for digital commerce or e-commerce to thrive. The very first, according to Wikipedia, which is the best source of information for anything, the very first e-commerce transaction that ever took place was a catalog purchase in 1963 that was done over POTS, over plain old telephone network, that transmitted a digital request for goods from one location to another. It's the first e-commerce experience happened in the 60s. But the uptake for consumer adoption obviously trailed a long way behind that. What the perfect environment is that we now had a worldwide network of computers, and we had computers in just in a good amount of people's homes, and especially those of middle income that were able to, that had some disposable income to be able to spend it somewhere. We also had secure browsers. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of private companies being able to use cryptography that even the NSA couldn't crack at the time. What happens in the future is a completely different story, but the idea that private companies could keep their data private over public networks without government interference and without being regulated in that way was a landmark decision. So, and the fact that everyone now had the ability to have debit cards and credit cards in their wallets that could also be interchanged online was also a perfect environment. And it created this secure environment and gave everybody sort of the feeling of safety to be able to adopt this brave new world, this brave new technology. So these Goldilocks conditions. In fact, it wasn't just in the United States, the actual drafting of NAFTA and economic policy and allowing the supply chains to allow for cheaper goods to be to have cross-border goods flying back and forth between US and Canada and Mexico, having labor that's able to participate in this new economy as well, because we all know it is expensive to ship things, and the first hurdle to overcome in the supply chain was, why would I ever buy something online and pay for shipping when I could get it at my local store right down the road for free? We didn't have the 500 million products sitting on Amazon in 1998. If you look at how iOS has progressed, I believe, and it's only been about 10 years since the release of the iPhone, I believe that we're on a similar trajectory path. If you look at the skeuomorphic design, or the real-world sort of parallel design that you see from the original iPhone to what we have today, the grooming of the consumer to have a metaphor that stands only on its own is remarkable. And we did that in just 10 years. And what's incredible is the users or the consumers are actually pushing Apple now past their own boundaries. And they're starting to demand, if you look at consumer sentiment around Apple, their hardware devices, their consumer sentiment is at an all-time high. The AirPods, which was largely panned as the most easy-to-lose headphone device ever to be created, is one of the highest-rated consumer satisfaction devices that Apple has ever released. The thing is that Apple was listening to their consumers and saying, we need wireless headphones. So the consumers are starting to push Apple to push their own boundaries to actually take, now Apple isn't the first to ever make wireless headphones, but the consumers have actually taken it beyond that 10-year timeline to say, we need something more, we need it newer, and we need it faster. And they're starting to do that to consumers. The icons of old are now, because they're changing so quickly, our iconography is changing. The way that we think about the world are now more in the abstract. So we're seeing icons like this in our e-commerce experiences because the shopping carts don't make sense anymore. Why do we put items in a shopping cart online? Why do we push them through virtual categories where products are aligned in aisles and categorized in like groups? Why do we put them in through a checkout where we pay and we have to give all the particulars of our information? That metaphor doesn't need to exist anymore. And in fact, that metaphor is right here at its death. This month, Amazon's one-click patent expires. This month. So the idea that we need a shopping cart to persist or to engage in these commerce experiences, that metaphor no longer needs to apply, and we can actually begin to break out of it. iTunes is the one who popularized one-click. iTunes was the perfect vehicle for selling one-off transactions that had no complimentary purchase. A single song for 99 cents with a single click was the perfect vehicle to demonstrate why you would ever want to buy something with just one click and one interaction. And Apple was a great brand for doing that as well, because they sold you the hardware devices that allowed you to consume that. But now that Amazon and all the others have won our business and have won our trust as consumers, we are starting to expect those same types of consumer experiences everywhere we go. So we're not just expecting to have the one experience with Amazon, with the one-click experience. We want that everywhere we go. And if you're a retailer, if you work closely with retailers, you're going to hear the demands from the retailers very soon that their consumers want to check out faster. Now, we've been doing this in some degree with social login, social checkout for some time, but there's more work to be done. So commerce now today is on demand and it's real time. It's no longer shopping as a destination and knowing which brand portal to go to and shopping one-to-one at a brand, and me having to want to buy Adidas, so I go to the Adidas store, and me wanting to, we now expect that shopping is everywhere we go. We also expect that shopping and the best deals are available to us at the moment we're ready to make a purchase decision. And we're building on impulse buys and purchases more than ever. And so the death of the shopping cart really is built on a few key items, which is single item transactions. Sorry, retailers, AOVs are going to continue to go lower, but we have to build better engagement with brands so that you have higher customer lifetime values. Downloadables or ephemeral products, things that are virtual, are right on the cusp of becoming every bit as valuable as hard goods or soft goods that we sell every day in our stores. What's incredible about this is that we're transcending the line from the real world to where the real world has there's a plurality of real worlds now. Pokemon Go last year actually conveyed a concept that's really easy for us to all identify with now. Anybody play Pokemon Go? It is the best example for consumers to understand that there are virtual worlds that live on top of our real world. And we are now having to face all kinds of new challenges in that virtual world. That virtual world is subject to vandalism, just like our real world is. That virtual world will have virtual goods that are able to be transacted. There are art installations right now that exist. You could walk around New Haven with a particular app and see everything from graffiti to beautiful art, all in a virtual space that you walk around and you don't even know exists every day. People are going to want to encounter commerce in that same way. And those products don't live forever. Those products are ephemeral. Some of them they're ephemeral. Some of them are consumable, and so they'll want to continue to buy and interact with you in that way. So what is the future of commerce? So we have a few that I want to cover real quick. Viant just released a study. We had a little bit of an in-depth on our Future Commerce podcast about this, that passive commerce is now a proven method for driving high ROI experiences for those of you that are doing ad buys in digital commerce. What is passive commerce? Passive commerce is commerce everywhere, and that's commerce in the sidebar of the site that is the news site that you visit every day. It is in the app that you use to track your calorie count. It is in your fitness tracking. It is putting your brand in front of consumers everywhere that they go. So at the moment that they're ready to purchase, you're available for them to buy the product that they're looking for, and it is available for the best price anywhere around. So there's a difference here. So passive commerce lives, what I would say, between the two things that we do really well. It exists in a space between intent generation, which is getting people actually excited about a product, and to the intent harvesting, which is getting people to click the checkout button. If you're doing lead back advertising of any way, passive commerce is the evolution of lead back. So here's a good example of this, which is now dead and gone by the wayside. It turns out people don't like buying products on Pinterest. They just like looking at products on Pinterest. But it is the textbook example of passive and being able to put products in front of a customer where they have long purchase cycles, potentially high AOVs, something that's an aspirational product for people or a status symbol that they can look at and desire for a long time. And the moment that they're ready to buy it, they have the ability to, and they can buy it within the context that they're in without having to leave. At Code Commerce last week with Kara Swisher, the Pinterest CEO said is that it turns out people don't actually want to buy on Pinterest. People actually want to buy and engage with the brand directly. So we're still at a place where we're waiting for the de facto example of this to exist in the real world, but it's likely to happen in social in some way. And Facebook is pushing the boundaries. Facebook is actually helping smaller brands through their advertising platform and through lookalike audiences capitalize on this. So you can actually purchase in context on Facebook now. And it's not just in Facebook, in the ads, or in the Facebook timeline that we see every day. It's also in Facebook Messenger, which we'll talk about a little bit. Ambient Commerce is sort of a new concept which is sort of coming to the fore, which is commerce built into our everyday devices. It means it's commerce all around us. Has anyone ever seen an Amazon Dash button? So it started as an April Fool's Day joke a couple years ago, but it turns out it was actually a real product that Amazon was piloting, where you have a single purpose button that lives in your house, and you just press the button, and based on the press of the button, they would send you the product that was branded on that button. What's amazing is that we now have products that have these buttons built in, so brands can sell you the consumable goods that go along with the operation of those brands And after a certain number of the button presses, the ambient commerce approach is that the button is really just training your usage and consumption cycle. The button is just a means to an end for me to be able to make more accurate predictions about how people use our products and the rate at which they use it, and to suggest it to them when they need it. At its best, ambient commerce allows a merchant to interact with their consumer in a way that is absolutely seamless and almost magical. It's getting out in front of the need for something and having to click the button and for them to tell you you're going to need this next week and have it show up at the door. And Whirlpool's not the only one doing it. Another example is the integrated SIM card in the Xenius, which is the Nespresso device that allows you to reorder coffee pods. And there are more and more examples of this happening in consumer goods every day. And in fact, we're starting to see hardware costs be subsidized by the ongoing, it's the printer and ink model all over again, but for auto subscriptions. And so that's an amazing thing. Does anyone remember last year when everybody was telling you that chatbots were going to change the world? Does anyone remember this? Am I the only person who remembers this? Conversational commerce is, it's actually interesting because, this actually is not playing. Oh, that's a shame. There's a really good video right here. Just imagine a really good video that's right there. Conversational commerce is an interesting technology that I'm still really bullish on. It is the idea that we can exchange and have contexts for commerce that live outside of our normal commerce context. So instead of me going to a site and clicking a button to buy something, I can make a group purchase decision. And that, whether that's in Facebook Messenger's canonical example, which would be trying to split an Uber together, it could be everything from the Taco Bot. Taco Bell has something called the Taco Bot, where if you and 10 of your colleagues at work all wanted to simultaneously have irritable bowel syndrome at lunch with Taco Bell, then you could make a group purchase decision and split the cost all in the comforts of your chat experience. But it transcends that as well, because while spoken word from one person to another is the fastest way for me to communicate to you, the fastest way for me to receive your intent is actually through written word. So this is why we're seeing an explosion of things like Alexa everywhere, and digital assistants on all of our devices. Those auditory assistants, they give us the ability to be able to speak out loud and continue in our own contexts. Amazon Echo is being sort of called the kitchen device, but it's everything from home automation to purchase and intent. There is actually a really neat example of this. It's a store that has no website. It's called Drink Easy. And this exists in Manhattan and San Francisco, because of course it does. But it is a blend between a home liquor delivery service and a concierge service for finding the kinds of bourbons and whiskeys that you might like. But also, through that concierge or that one-to-one personal sales rep that you're interacting with over text, they can also allow and facilitate the purchase, and it happens entirely over text message. There's no website to interact with. These are the types of transformative experiences that get commerce out of our normal context and put them only into a new context that exists all around us every day. And you know what? We're actually slow on the uptake in the United States. Everything from paying your mortgage to getting a cab to ordering takeout is happening on WeChat every day with 1 billion people in Asia. So that's just happening. And as we move beyond commerce, even in text message, we're actually training a consumer to want it on demand and to have you available at our button press. And so as we sort of move on, brands will begin to develop their own versions of these and iterate on these ideas, where it's no longer just branded buttons, it's virtual branded buttons. In fact, the virtual Amazon Dash button is a very highly praised addition to the Amazon app, in that it's actually making logical suggestions about the buttons that should appear on your home screen for the types of products you order every day. And it turns out I buy batteries and RX bars on Amazon all the time. I didn't think that I did, but I buy them just about every 3 months. So having a button on my phone that I can just touch has actually been a real improvement to my life. And And it'll be even better when I can just speak it aloud. It's dangerous to have one of these in an office environment because there's all kinds of things you can purchase on Amazon that you wouldn't think you can purchase on Amazon, and people like to come into your office and just ask Amazon to purchase those items. So be careful where you have these sitting around. These are still for home use. Or in my case, you get a My Little Pony DVD that just gets added to your cart, spontaneously because my kids love My Little Pony. Where are we going, okay? So I've talked about these things that are coming. If you're a retailer, you're consumer, just like they've pushed you into subscription ordering, you want to do all these things because you see the obvious benefit in it. So when you talk about things like augmented reality, virtual reality, or 3D printing on demand, it all sounds very far-fetched, and I would agree with you. As a person who thinks about, and I'm fascinated by these things every day, these things seem a long way off. But I'll just remind you that just 10 years ago, everybody still had flip phones. So it's probably not as far off as we think. In fact, Amazon's recently filed a patent for 3D print on demand from delivery trucks. And there are types of devices today that ostensibly are already 3D printed, and you may not even know it. Everything from spare parts that you might be ordering to replace or fix items in your home, to even textiles. There are plenty of examples of 3D printing that's actually assistive in manufacturing today, and I would venture to say there are parts of automobiles and the like that are benefiting from 3D printing. And so this is not that far off. The fulfillment by Amazon, that FBA model will extend into create on demand, and the pilots that are happening today are showing that they can actually be very, very beneficial for a consumer. Anything that gets products into the hands of the consumer quicker to allow them to live a better life is what we should be aiming for. So let's recap. So these are the things we need to be thinking about. And I truly believe this. So passive commerce, that's being available everywhere for your consumer, so where they're ready to make the purchase decision, you're there and standing at the ready to give them the best offer. And that's for every type of product, but it lends itself very well to high AOV and long purchase time decision products. Conversational commerce, that's I would almost rebrand this nowadays into commerce, outside of the brand context. This is you being able to have a conversation that facilitates a purchase decision with your consumer, and that conversation can extend beyond just the purchase decision to everything from, the return merchandise authorization to answering questions and helping them with their reorders. And ambient commerce, that's commerce that's on autopilot, that helps the commerce that happens around us with our consumable goods, that helps and sort of predictive nature of it, that helps you live a little bit better of a life without having to worry about when to reorder something so that you don't run out of those coffee pods in the morning. And then on demand. And generally on demand is a far future concept where things and the purchases that we make every day can be facilitated by things that are built or assembled in transit. And really, what are we talking about? We're talking about death of old paradigms. We are all still trying to get up to speed every single day on just trying to get stuff from our warehouse into the hands of the people that bought the products. And so it's a scary thing to be told that there's more yet for us to do. And for some brands, this may work. For some brands, it will not. There's no silver bullet in e-commerce. There won't be a silver bullet for this stuff. But I do believe the old paradigms are dying, and especially with augmented reality, especially with virtual reality, 1 billion devices by the end of this year, 1 billion, between iOS and Android, will have the built-in capability of doing augmented reality. It's a window into a world on your phone screen. It's here. IKEA is already piloting it. This is a thing that is happening. And so the old paradigms are dying. The shopping cart that we push through a virtual store and load it up and take it to a checkout is dead. One click is just the future, is one step into the future, and there's a very, very bright future ahead that we couldn't even begin to divine. I say this on the podcast all the time. Try imagining yourself trying to explain Facebook to somebody 20 years ago. It wouldn't make any sense. So the concepts that we're talking about in the context of this commerce will be the kind of commerce that could only have ever happened in augmented reality or virtual reality. And that commerce is everywhere we go because we carry those phones on our hips. And remember that shopping is no longer a destination in and of itself. shopping is everywhere that we are. Thank you so much.
Great job. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I will admit, as a mom of 2 small kids, I don't mind if they kill the shopping cart just as long as it's not the one with the little steering wheels in the front to keep my children occupied at like aisle 7 when I've completely burned through all of my little Go-Gurt pouches and they are screaming. But that was really insightful. I truly learned a tremendous